Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing super well. Welcome back to Karan Academy. My name's Karan, and today we'll be talking about celiac disease. So, what is celiac disease? Well, I'm sure you know that it's a condition characterized by an intolerance to gluten. It's often referred to as a gluten allergy or gluten intolerance, um, and it has about a 1% prevalence and a higher rate in women. This is consistent with most autoimmune conditions, which have a higher prevalence in women. It has a bimodal distribution, and we'll talk about why this happens. The first peak being between 12 to 18 months of age. And this is when we first introduce gluten in their diet, usually through wheat, barley, rye, and so on. And then the second peak is usually in the third to fourth decade. It does have a higher prevalence in people of a Northern European background. This is linked to genetic predisposition in the human leukocyte antigen gene, or the HLA gene, most commonly the HLA-DQ2, but you don't need to know this at all. But let's talk about what's actually going here on a pathophysiological level. So the issue is with gluten, or we say it's to gluten, but it's actually not. It's actually to gliadin, which is a breakdown product of gluten. So technically, yes, it's to gluten, but yes and no. It doesn't make any difference to how we would approach this. So at the time of first exposure, so this is when you're a kid who's being introduced to solid foods, we see an autoimmune process develop, which kind of explains the first half of our bimodal population, right? Because this is when we first introduce gluten to their diet. So how does gluten metabolism work? And how does then celiac disease work? You eat food that has gluten. So far, so good. Your endothelial cells in your gut, especially the duodenum, release an enzyme called tissue transglutaminase. What tissue transglutaminase, or TTG, does is it breaks gluten down into gliadin. In celiac disease, what happens is that your T cells are abnormally activated because of this gliadin, and therefore they start producing antibodies to your tissue transglutaminase. And because the tissue transglutaminase is produced in the intestinal epithelium, you end up with chronic inflammation of the intestinal epithelium. This is often because of the infiltration of lymphocytes. This results in damage to the villi, which was seen as a villus atrophy. And because of this inflammatory process, you end up with a higher rate of turnover of the crypt cells. And the crypt cells are the ones that secrete a lot of these enzymes. And therefore, this causes crypt hyperplasia. And these are the three exact pathological changes you would see in a biopsy. And on pathology and on the ward, it's very common for you to be asked, what are the three pathological or pathology findings or microscopic findings seen in a person with celiac disease? And those are infiltration of lymphocytes or lymphocytosis in the epithelium, villus atrophy, and crypt hyperplasia. So when I say crypt, so these tiny kind of indentations are the crypts, and these become deeper with celiacs, and you lose the nice villus structure. I also have, oh no, not yet. There's another picture which I really hate, and I'll get to that in a second. So how will this present? Well, because of now you've lost the absorptive capacity of the duodenum and some of the intestine, you are going to have chronic diarrhea. You're going to have nausea and vomiting. But also, because you're not absorbing contents, you're going to have a lot of systemic features like fatigue, weight loss, iron deficiency anemia, B12 deficiency, as well as failure to thrive in babies. And this is quite commonly why they come in to begin with. So you might see parents bring their kid to their GP saying, well, my kid is not putting on weight anymore. And then you should ask, well, what is the kid eating? Oh, well, just normal food. We've recently switched him to kind of a more solid food-based diet. And then you wonder, could this be a gluten intolerance? You also see some interesting findings. So you see this dermatological presentation called dermatitis herpetiformis, and that's quite commonly because of that same autoimmune reaction. You can also see IgA deficiency. Well, why do you see IgA deficiency? Because one of the so the tissue transglutaminase antibody, actually, never mind, sorry. It's too complex. I think it'll just confuse you. But just know it can cause IgA deficiency as a coexisting thing. And then other autoimmune conditions like IBD and rheumatoid arthritis. And this is what dermatitis herpetiformis presents as. It's not a pretty picture, is it? So instead of going through just my usual stock standard bedside and bloods and imaging, let's just go to where the money's at. So we have a triad of antibody tests. So anti-endomysial antibody, or EMA. We have anti-gliadin. As we know, we have a antibody to gliadin, which is the breakdown product of gluten. And then you also have anti-tissue transglutaminase. Doing a total IgA level is also important in this case. Now, why is that important? Pause. But I don't think anyone would have thought this, because why would you? I'm the only person who sits down and is like, well, why is this important? Well, the reason that's important is because, as we mentioned, one of the potential coexisting conditions with celiacs is IgA deficiency. Surprisingly enough, the antibody to tissue transglutaminase is an IgA antibody. Therefore, if you have IgA deficiency, you can often have low or normal levels of tissue transglutaminase despite having celiac disease. Let me say that again. Tissue transglutaminase is probably the most sensitive and specific antibody we have. However, if you have low levels of all IgAs, you can often have a false negative because the anti-tissue transglutaminase antibody is also an IgA antibody, right? If you're uncertain, you can also consider HLA testing for the genes we previously discussed. In terms of imaging, you can do an esophageal oh my God. I really thought I was going to get that one. I really was hoping to get that one. An esophagogastroduodenoscopy. And you can also take biopsies of the proximal part of the duodenum. This is what a normal duodenum looks like, and I absolutely hate this picture. It's absolutely vile and disgusting, and I don't want to look at it. So these are the tiny villi, as you can see. And this is what, oh, I hate both of these pictures so much. This is what celiacs would look like. And you see, you've lost that villus architecture. In terms of management, well, it's relatively straightforward. You want to have a lifelong abstinence from any products that contain gluten. So wheat, rye, barley, or spelt. I don't know what spelt is, but I saw it on the list and I thought I'd mention it. Recommended foods are rice is good, corn is good, potatoes, soybean, millets. And here's just a nice diagram I found from some gluten-free advocacy group that talks about what's bad and then what's good. I also want to mention, for any hipsters who don't eat gluten for health reasons, it's really doing you no good unless you actually have celiac. So abstaining from gluten has no health benefits unless you have celiac disease. So just keep that in mind. And that's all we had for celiacs. I hope that was helpful. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to send me a message. And please look after yourself and please look after your loved ones.